You're listening from audio. Welcome back to Project Authority. And if you're watching for the first time on video, hey, I run a podcast and I talk about the most random things, creativity and just philosophy and all types of other things going on across the world and culture, whatever problems and all that stuff. We're trying to solve not exactly issues, but we're trying to solve ideas and we're trying to break them down. And we want to ensure that we cultivate our minds in such a way that we can gain valuable information from what we dive into so that we can utilize that information in a very practical manner and actually expand our creativity so that we could expand it into other projects or into other arguments and other conversations that we have across the world. Today, we're talking about morals and its complexities, because morals, you see, is an extremely subjective standpoint in our society, but it's treated very objectively. And morals, they fluctuate. You go across the world, the morals are not the same. You go across the United States, hell, they're not exactly the same. And so you sort of have to understand where these morals come from, whether or not they're subjective or objective, why they're important, and how you should approach this whole principle so that when you are engaging with the world and having these discussions and debates, you're not going around sounding like an idiot when you make some very preposterous claim, at least from a societal conventional standpoint. Before we get into that, check out the links in the description below. There will be a Discord server, a fine one for creatives who want to join and expand their creativity and make something happen. Let's create this super brand, a group of creatives, a strong group of aspiring individuals who want to really succeed in life, who actually want to take that leap of faith and burn the ships and just trudge on forward in this journey of life. Let's make it happen. Let's group together. Let's discuss ideas. Let's do it. Link in the bio or show notes or description. With that being said, I'm going to keep this intro very short and we are going to get into morals. So, why are morals important? Why are we moralists, more or less, right? Why do we hold it to such a high standard in our society? Well, we need a set of rules and principles to live by, and we also need a good idea of what's good and what's bad. Understandable. We don't want to live in this animalistic, I'm going to call it animalistic culture. Of course, I'm just referring to more so just wildness, and anarchism would probably be a better term. We don't want to live in this state of anarchy where it's free reign and our natural rights just take over, whatever. We don't want that. We want to live in a world of order. We want to live in a world of progression. We want to expand as far as technology goes and as far as just, the human mind goes. We want to escape the simplicity of nature in most part, at least from a physical standpoint. And then with that comes sets of principles and societal orders and governments and all types of other things. And of course, moral principles play into more than just the individual or the group. It plays into our entire government process, the way in which we deliberate between this law and that law. Morals have a huge impact, a huge control over the things in which we indulge in as a society. And so I think the better we understand that, the better we'll be able to understand why people are driven by the things that they do. With that being said, we have to understand that most morals are subjective. In fact, I'd argue all of them are, but of course I don't know everything, so I can't say that. But a good amount of morals that we have are very much subjective. There are things which people do, which are, I guess, from a societal standard, disgusting or just terrible. You don't want to see that. You don't want to experience that are not technically morally wrong. They're not harming anybody, which we usually use as a standard or as a range for morals. They're not harming anyone. They're not infringing on any rights or whatever. no one is being hurt in the process, and it's, whatever. But they're indulging in this very taboo thing, and as a society, we decide to view that and sort of just cringe and be like, "Oh my God, that is terrible. It's wrong," or whatever. We have this instinctive ability to define something before we can actually explain it. We already give our impressions, we give our judgment before we're even able to form an argument, to form any type of conversation or any nuance around the matter, which honestly, I don't think it's a system that we can break. I don't think it's a system in which we can really affect in such a way that suddenly it's flipped over and we're having conversation before we could come to an actual conclusion. I just don't think that's, whatever. Impressions don't go away. We're always going to have our initial impressions of things, and impressions are important because it gauges our sort of moral understanding of the world and our biases and what we believe to be right and wrong. Everyone has impressions. Everyone has an idea of right or wrong or good or bad from their own perspective. And generally speaking, it's the same across a society, or similar across a society. But there are those points, there are those areas in which it could become a bit more ambiguous and confusing to deliberate. So when we think about why we have our morals, or why we express our morals, or why we call out certain things and whatever, we need to understand ourselves as creatures as being very much righteous. And of course, I'm referring a lot to the book The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I always mess up his last name. Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind. It's an amazing book. I definitely recommend it. I'm going based off of that and just looking into the righteousness of humankind. The fact that what we believe to be right is right objectively. And we will fight to the end of it because we want to prove that this is right. That whatever this thing going on over here is, it's wrong, it's terrible. But our perspective, it's right. It is correct. And of course, this sort of righteousness plays into damn near everything that we do, namely politics and religions and philosophies that we wish to follow. Our righteousness usually guides us towards these ideologies. And of course, you can make an argument for whether or not that's right or that's wrong, but it's a part of our design. We're righteous creatures at the end of the day. We could believe in fluidity entirely in perspective or whatever, but of course, there's a bit of righteousness that goes into that feeling, that angle on life. And so, of course, we're not trying to get rid of our righteousness. We're not trying to be so humble to the point where we just, whatever, we fuck up our whole process. Of course, you have to identify with things. Of course, you need to lean towards certain things. But I'd argue that when it comes to attaching morals to, say, politics and religion and hobbies and interests and whatever, it could be a bit dangerous, especially when you're so deep into it, when you're so deep into your ideals that you can't seem to accept a different perspective. Or to put that in a better way, in a way in which might resonate with more people, you're so deep into your own moral values and ideals to the point where it's very hard to reason with a view that we might view as completely crazy. And perhaps it can be crazy, but let's think about general cases in which we actually are dealt a solid argument to go against something. And perhaps the topic is very dark or whatever. Maybe we're talking about guns and abortion rights or whatever. These are very divisive topics within our society, right? And if you lean towards, say, left or right, and if your morals are wrapped around the ideas of the group, then you're going to find it extremely hard to reason with the other side. And we always make this argument for being more reasonable and being more bipartisan and being more moderate with our ideals and being more open-minded, and the other side is so closed off and blah, 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 this and that. But it's really just the two sides are too wrapped up in their own righteousness, to the point where their ideals and their morals are basically concealments of their own individual wants, their own self-interest. And that goes for a lot of people, even myself included to some extent. My ideas, my ideals, my principles, they're all for my own self-interest. And of course, that can serve other people as well. But the main purpose is to serve me, and the same to you for your own principles and morals or whatever. So why are morals different then? Why do we all share different morals? I think the answer is fairly simple. Our morals are based off of course, our self-interests, our experiences, our biases, all types of different things. Of course, we built up this moral understanding from a very young age, from the time that we were infants to now where we're all maybe teenagers, adults, whatever. So we built up this moral understanding of the world, and there are certain things in which we deem as good and certain things which we deem as bad. And for the most part, it serves us well, although most of it may not necessarily be truth. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's false, but things can really be within the gray area. I'll get into that later. But anyway, we built up that understanding. And so morals are different mostly because of how we're raised, our environment, the things which surrounded us, the things which we were consuming. If we were across the world, we would have completely different lives. If we were born in, say, India, then we'd experience a more Indian style of moral reasoning. In that case, maybe as a woman, you might not have as many rights or whatever. Perhaps some things that you could do in the United States in India might seem taboo as far as maybe sex goes and a bunch of other things that we in the United States usually look at a bit more loosely, right? And so we need to consider geography, and we also need to understand ideologies. All of these are built up over time. So you got to think about it. You're susceptible to thinking in a completely different way, or you had the potential to think in a completely different way. If you were in a very much different environment, if you were raised differently, well, the environment alone will get you right. The school system teaches you to sort of abide by the rules and follow instructions and be respectful to your classmates and to the adults and the superiors of the room and all of this stuff. That's building up this sort of idea of moral reasoning, moral judgment. And so you have to understand your experiences. You really do need to understand that. And when you can finally grasp this idea of how complex the building up of morals is, the better off we'll be understanding other people. Because you might see that other guy and his moral principles, and they may seem a bit crazy. Of course, if it's harming somebody else, or if it's harming the general good, then in that case, that's another thing. That's another problem. That's something that, yeah, you do need to do something about it. But if it's causing no harm, as different as it may be, you have to be able to understand that that's just life. Not everyone's going to be the same. And of course, as Americans, we should probably be better understanding of this, seeing as we live in an absolute fucking melting pot and everyone is different, or everyone wants to be different in some way, shape, or form. But I digress. Of course, objective morals and subjective morals is also an extreme gray area, because I could say that it's morally wrong to kill someone, but what if that person did bad things? Or at least what I deem to be bad things, say rape, murder, assault of the innocent. I think that justifies killing them, but again, generally speaking, killing someone is wrong. You see, it is far too complex to group up these different things and try to attribute morals and try to make conclusions out of them. Context matters a lot in almost every single case. Hell, with abortion, there's so much context which is needed. First of all, was the woman assaulted? Was the baby just an accident? Did they just not practice safe intercourse? See, it's so easy to look at something and be like, no, this needs to be that way. But let's think about it for a second. Let's let our intuitions pass us by. Let's let our impressions sort of seep through. And let's say, okay, look, let's break this down because this is how I'm feeling right now, but let's try to figure this out so that I can come to a more clear conclusion, so that I could come to a better conclusion. Let's try to break this down so that it makes more sense. Because, of course, we have that sort of, I won't call it a detriment. It's a part of our nature to judge things before we can explain them. And a lot of the times people take that even a step further and they'll make their judgment. And no matter how wrong it could possibly be, or no matter how much context they're given, it won't shift because there's a certain set of pride in holding on to that answer. And so even if something may be explained in a bad way, and the idea is like twisted and the method behind the thing, even if the thing is true, if the method is false, you can still sort of find a way to make it true, at least from that type of person's perspective. And of course, as most of us do, we don't like thinking. Most of us don't even know that thinking is a process within itself. It's a chore. It's a discipline within itself. Like, we actually have to think these things through and process them thoughtfully. And that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time and deliberation and perspective. And a lot of people just aren't willing to do that. And so the morals their impressions take over. The righteousness takes over, and their impressions and their built up morals leads them to said conclusion, right? And so if we're on the topic of, say, abortion or whatever, if the thing was just a mistake and the people just decided, yeah, fuck it, we're going to do dumb things and get whatever. If the risk was there and it happens and it was consensual, then you can make the argument that, whoa, hold on, maybe we should look deeper into this topic. And then, of course, if we're talking about assault, then it's like, okay, hold on. We need to figure something out here, because is she really about to have this baby? So, of course, it's a very nuanced thing. And I think the more we look deeper into it, the more we actually think. I know I'm asking for a lot when I'm telling people to think, right? I'm asking for way too much out of us because, wow, thinking, I could never. Man, come on, bro. Just think for once, man. It's not that hard. And so we have to really consider whether or not our reasoning is truthful or prideful. Do we truly believe in what we're saying and what we believe is right and wrong? Are we willing to defend these things with intelligence and clarity? Are we willing to take in new perspective and actually challenge these things instead of blocking off with our own sort of defense mechanisms and fortifications? And are we going to continue to just be ever deflecting of any possible alternative? Because let's be honest here, if your reasoning is truthful, then you won't have an issue defending it against any other perspective. And of course, at the end of the day, this life is far too complex for someone to just have a very concrete reasoning. In most cases, you could make tweaks. In most cases, you could open yourself up or maybe close up a little more. There's always adjustments. It just goes with the time, right? And so when you're thinking about that, you really need to consider, like, okay, if my reasoning is truthful, can I defend this? Am I willing to prosecute it? And to just look back and double back and do the observing myself, the deposition. Is deposition the word? I don't know. Am I willing to analyze my point? Am I willing to make a solid counter argument to go against my perspective, my reasoning? And am I willing to take from that the best possible conclusion? Or am I just prideful? Am I somebody who will go through the screaming match, go through the debate, yell out the top of their lungs and say, no, you're wrong, I'm right? What type of person are you? It's very, 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 very complex, these morals, right? So, with that being said, how do you prevent yourself from turning into this self-righteous individual? Well, you need to be more accepting, be more open. Of course, that doesn't mean that you need to take in absolutely everything you hear and apply it because now all of a sudden it makes sense. Of course, that'd just be irrational. But understand that a lot of things that we indulge in and a lot of things that we believe aren't always fact. They just serve us. And whether or not they're good or bad is up to your own deliberation, is up to your own, observation, whether or not it's good or bad for you, whether or not it serves you well or not. But a lot of it isn't fact. Look, the fact that I follow Stoicism and I journal every single day and write about philosophy and all these things and my ideas on the world, it doesn't mean that they're fact. It doesn't mean that they're false either, because a lot of it could have some truth to it, but objectively speaking, it just serves me better than probably another individual who couldn't apply it in the same way. So we really need to understand that. And when we're making these comparisons with other individuals and their viewpoints, we need to understand, is it serving them well? Is it harming the community? Is it leading them to the right place? Those are the questions we need to ask. And when it comes to morals itself, of course, there are things that we know for a fact that we shouldn't do, and we feel terrible for doing them. But there are also things that we could probably take a second look at and do a deeper analysis of and really think to understand, okay, maybe I can look at this from a different lens. Maybe I could double back on this and break it down a bit more, do a true decoction of the whole matter. Anyway, with that being said, I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, of course. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and share. Rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Check out the show notes, links in the description. Fire stuff. And of course, I'm looking forward to the next discussion. That being said, this is Ibra signing out, and I'll catch y'all later, man.